The Grandest Bookshop in the World by Amelia Miller. Wonderland was usually dark and noisy. The customers would wander through its twisting passageways, laughing and yelling. They stumbled on the warped checkerboard of the tiles of madness. They bobbed and waved their arms before the four warped mirrors made their reflections hideous. They twirled the wide brass praxinoscopes and watched the pictures inside come to life. A child chasing a hoop, a pair of acrobats swinging on a trapeze. At the window to the deep, they would gasp in awe at the glowing fish rippling through the dark water. They gawked at the two-headed serpent, terror of two womba, a little pair of conjoined twin pythons called Bubble and Squeak. They marveled at the wall of wonders. The unicorn horn, the Martian rose, the amazing deadly mandrake. Some of these curiosities, like the ammonite fossil, were genuine. Many were not, like the horn, which wasn't from a unicorn but an oryx antelope. Valley felt a selfish pleasure in their secret truths, like a treat he didn't have to share. But to all that was during the day. Now Wonderland was eerily quiet. Valley's footsteps rang out on the floor. It seemed less like a fun darkness full of interesting things to discover, and more like a dangerous darkness where anything can be hiding. Pearl strode past him. "All right, what are we looking for?" "Some kind of test and some kind of snare." A 30-foot oarfish reared into view at the window to the deep, flashing its luminous stripes in the black sea. The window was a fortunate accident of magical failure. Pa had meant to create a window across the world to help people learn about one another's culture. Like an explorer's photographic slideshow, but live and in color. He'd chosen the island of Java for the experiment. Not counting the attempts that had been interrupted, Pa had failed a dozen times to make the window displaying anything but his frustrated reflection. The last attempt was a 20-page mental marathon, which had taken Pa the 5 quietest hours of the night to write and left him groggy all the next day. Whether he had the wrong coordinates or whether Java was simply too far away, the enchantment had missed its target completely. The window showed the ocean's twilight zone, somewhere in the world. But it was easier to take a steamer to Java than to dive 1,000 feet into the sea. In a way, the window to the deep was a greater educational success than anyone could have hoped. "You won't find it there, Val." Pearl skipped over to where the mechanical orchestra was poised in wait for a coin. Then she froze. Did you hear that? Probably the arcade cooling down. The building always creaked when the temperature changed, like the cracking of muscles in a stretch. Pearl looked at the ceiling. I think it was thunder. Valley stood still and listened. A low, distant roar was just audible, running under the sounds of the customers outside. It's the wind. I don't remember it being windy when we started. Neither did Valley. He had been thinking about the challenge ahead of them, not the weather. It annoyed him that Pearl wasn't doing the same now. He gave her only a shrug in reply, then turned to look into the famous figures box. His own face peered back at him from atop the miniature waxwork bodies of Napoleon Bonaparte, Ned Kelly, Queen Victoria. Nothing strange there, just the usual mirrored illusions. He didn't quite trust Pearl to notice any differences in the Wall of Wonders, but he left her to it and examined Bubble and Squeak. The pythons raised their heads, tongues licking. They probably hoped he would give them something to eat. Feeding them took patience, as well as time and dead mice, which Valley didn't have. Bubble and Squeak didn't know they had the same body. They had to be fed a minute or two apart, each head hidden from her twin's sight with a piece of cards so that they didn't fight over each other's food. Just as well, Valley didn't have to share a body with any of his siblings. It was hard enough sharing a room with Eddie sometimes. Nothing was extraordinary about the pythons tonight, at least. No more extraordinary than pythons themselves. Valley turned to face his reflection, monstrously tall in the distorted glass. Pa called this part of Wonderland the Smiling Gallery, but he was the only one. Across the city, everyone referred to them as the funny mirrors. Was anything funny about them this evening? Valley stepped closer to the first mirror, where a short, fat reflection with a giant head peered back. Tiny marks showed on the mirror's frame. Valley crouched to investigate the bottom left corner, his reflection shrinking down flat and stumpy like a wheel of cheese. The marks became letters, lying on their sides. They were evenly spaced and neatly painted, as if they had always been there. B-E-G. Stop staring at yourself, Pearl said. I'm not. There's writing on the frame. She hurried over, tilting her head to read the message that ran up the left side of the mirror. Beginning in anguish, surrounded by care. What does that mean? Hang on, said Valley. There's more at the top. You'll find I reside. In the midst of despair, they both read, tilting their heads the other way to read the message running down the right-hand side of the mirror. I dwell in the mountains. The next part was upside down. Hold on, let's start again, Pearl said. Valley, who was getting the hang of reading the frames, returned to the left-hand side. They read at the same time, following the words around the different shapes and sizes of the mirrors. Pearl bent over in a most ungraceful pose to read the upside-down parts. Beginning in anguish, surrounded by care, you'll find I reside in the midst of despair. I dwell in the mountains, the plains, and the waves. See never in birth, yet always in graves. I appear in the banquet, each party and game, the middle of war, yet in peace just the same. I am found in the darkness, but not in the light, in pairs or alone, but in crowds out of sight. I am silent in heaven, unseen within hell. Though absent in greeting, I'll join your farewell. Valley straightened up and glanced at the entrance. To his relief, no customers seemed to have come in. Chanting about hell and graves into crazy mirrors would have been hard to explain. It must be something sad, Pearl mused, like grief. Valley scanned the riddle. Each party seemed to imply that a celebration was impossible without it. I don't think so. Death. Death could be found in darkness or light, and the line about parties spoiled it too. No. Bats! Bats, repeated Valley flatly. Bats in the sea. Cricket bats are used in games, and the animals live in mountains and caves and in the dark. He exhaled hard through his nose. It's waves, not caves. Stop guessing and take this seriously. Pearl set her hands on her hips. I don't see the point if you're just going to throw away all my ideas. I am not. I'm thinking them through, and none of them work. Well, what do you think it is? Valley turned sideways to read the edge of a frame again. I don't know yet. Pearl huffed and muttered the first few lines to herself. Then she said, Water! Water can be in the light. No, Val. She gestured at her shoes. The floor is all wet. A puddle was creeping across the floor. Valley's eyes followed the flow past the mechanical fortune teller, past the famous figure boxes, past the snake tank. The corner of the window to the deep was dripping. In the silence, Valley heard the low roar again. It wasn't coming from the wind outside. It was coming from the ocean in here. It's leaking. Yes, Pearl, I can see that. How is it leaking? How should I know? It was as impossible and alarming as a tarantula leaping out of a photograph to scurry around the floor. The scene in the window had only ever been a silent moving image. Now it was in the room with them, a problem demanding to be solved. It shouldn't have been possible, but then again, Magnus Maximilian had frozen time. He'd brought something resembling Ruby to life. Who knew what else he could do? As if in response to this thought, a huge crack struck across the pane like a fork of lightning. Water sprayed out of it, bringing a cold, salty scent. I'll fetch Mr. Pike. Pearl ran down towards the exit, which was at the far end of Wonderland. At least it was supposed to be. Where the doorway had been, there was now only a wall. Pearl slapped it in disbelief. It's closed off! The puddle on the floor soaked through the seams of Valley shoes. Try the other one. Pearl splashed to the entrance of Wonderland, where she disappeared around the corner. No good, she said. We're trapped. All must be solved in time for you to win. Avoid, therefore, the snares that lurk within. We have to solve the riddle, Valley said, before the room fills up. Pearl ran back to the mirrors, her hands in anxious fists. What happens then? If Valley remembered his marine biology right, the water pressure in the twilight zone was very powerful. At its shallowest, it would grip a person like a giant's fist. At its deepest, it would crush their bones. The glass would not take long to shatter. The room would not take long to fill. A shard shot out of the corner of the window to the deep. Valley, cried Pearl, as the water crawled up her ankles. What will happen if the room fills up? Valley looked at the ceiling. It was flat. No fancy plaster moldings to hold pockets of breathable air. I expect we'll drown. Pearl's eyes widened. Did you think the obscure Smith would go easy on us just because we're children? I didn't think he'd kill us. The water sloshed again against the walls. Valley tried to clear his head. anguish, care, despair, darkness. It sounded like something both sinister and abstract. Pearl was probably on the right track with grief and death. Except none of those fit. Then there were all the references to visibility. Seen, appear, out of sight. A person, Pearl said. In crowds you don't see a person, you see people. Vi took his precious watch from his trouser pocket and tucked it in his waistcoat, hoping to keep it dry. I'm found in the darkness, but not in the light. Pearl turned upside down to read one of the frames again. The sea was lapping at the bottom, close to swallowing some of the riddle. A heart! Heartless people are meant to go to hell. People say you go to heaven if you have a good heart, but you wouldn't hear any heartbeats in heaven because everyone's dead. That sounded promising. Valley tried to ignore the freezing water creeping past his knees. Go on. I'm found in the darkness. It should be dark inside someone's body. That covers the crowd's bit as well. People's hearts would be there, but out of sight. You can't have a banquet, party, or game without people. Animals can live in mountains, plains, or the ocean, and most of them have hearts. It works for war, peace, anguish, and despair. Luminous fish were buttoning at the corner now, trying to pull themselves free of the current as cracks wriggled across the entire front panel of the glass. Why isn't it stopping, Val? Maybe Pearl had it wrong. What about graves? There are bodies in graves, but it says seen always in graves. Close enough, isn't it? The corner of the tank burst open with such tremendous force that it splattered against the opposite wall and snuffed out of the gas lamps. Freakish black creatures poured out of the gap. Though absent in greeting, I'll join your farewell. The answer wasn't a heart. The water was up to Valley's chest now. Poor Bubble and Squeak's head were each straining in a different direction, one reaching for the ceiling of their terrarium, the other trying to slither under a rock. He read the message again. Seen never in birth, but always in graves. That was strange phrasing. Shouldn't have been at birth. The pressure of the ocean punched out more fragments of glass. A wave rushed in, filling the room to neck height and lifting Valley off his feet. He grabbed one of the mirrors, fighting the raging current. Maybe Magnus Maximilian had given them too narrow a chance to succeed, and they were trapped here until fanged creatures broke out and dragged them to the bottom of the sea. Pearl was struggling to stay afloat, splashing in panic. Valley reached for her, but the current dragged her away. Should he let go of the mirrors to grab her? She might push him under. Then he would drown instead. Or they both might. He braced his feet against the mirror, ready to push off. But then Pearl's flailing hand caught one of the curtains on the wall of wonders, and he heard her gasping breaths. The challenge. That was only way out. In anguish, banquet, plains, game, waves, graves, the middle of war. The answer clicked into place like a key into a lock. It had nothing to do with the ideas of war, peace, sadness, or joy. It was all about the words, beginning in anguish, surrounded by care. Hey! Valley hooked his arm around the mirror to fight the sea pulling at his legs. It's an A! At the bottom of the flooded room, something gave away with a crack, and the water sucked Valley under. Chapter 9. Dance with Me. Grandest Bookshop in the World by Amelia Miller. Wonderland was usually dark and noisy. The customers would wander through its twisting passageways, laughing and yelling. They stumbled on the warped checkerboard of the tiles of madness. They bobbed and waved their arms before the four warped mirrors made their reflections hideous. They twirled the wide brass praxinoscopes and watched the pictures inside come to life. A child chasing a hoop, a pair of acrobats swinging on a trapeze. At the window to the deep, they would gasp in awe at the glowing fish rippling through the dark water. They gawked at the two-headed serpent, terror of two womba, a little pair of conjoined twin pythons called Bubble and Squeak. They marveled at the wall of wonders. The unicorn horn, the Martian rose, the amazing deadly mandrake. Some of these curiosities, like the ammonite fossil, were genuine. Many were not, like the horn, which wasn't from a unicorn but an oryx antelope. Valley felt a selfish pleasure in their secret truths, like a treat he didn't have to share, but to all that was during the day. Now Wonderland was eerily quiet. Valley's footsteps rang out on the floor. It seemed less like a fun darkness full of interesting things to discover, and more like a dangerous darkness where anything can be hiding. Pearl strode past him. "All right, what are we looking for? Some kind of test and some kind of snare." A 30-foot oarfish reared into view at the window to the deep, flashing its luminous stripes in the black sea. The window was a fortunate accident of magical failure. Pa had meant to create a window across the world to help people learn about one another's culture. Like an explorer's photographic slideshow, but live